I've driven these highways long enough to know that they have stories to tell. Tales of desolation, despair, and darkness that stretch beyond the asphalt and into the very heart of this vast country. But of all the miles I've logged as a truck driver, none compare to the night I found myself racing along the winding roads near the Mexican border, pursued by something far more sinister than any ghost. It was the dead of night, the kind of inky darkness that envelopes the world and swallows it whole. I was navigating the lonely highways of southern Arizona, making my way from Tucson to Nogales. The desolation of the desert surrounded me, an expanse of shadows and silence broken only by the steady hum of my truck's engine. I'd driven this route countless times, but this night felt different. The air was charged with an unsettling tension, a feeling that hung in the pit of my stomach like a weight. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was off. As I continued along the road, the unease grew, and my grip on the steering wheel tightened. It was then that I saw them in the distance, dim headlights flickering in the rearview mirror. I cursed under my breath, thinking it was another trucker looking to pass. But as the headlights drew closer, I realized that this was no ordinary encounter. It was a gang of vehicles, a convoy of darkened SUVs that seemed to materialize out of the darkness. My heart began to race, and a sense of dread washed over me. I knew that these back roads were not known for friendly encounters, and the reputation of the border region had grown increasingly dangerous in recent years. Smuggling, cartels, and violence were never far from the minds of those who traversed this desolate landscape. I decided to pick up my speed, hoping to put some distance between me and the approaching vehicles. But they continued to gain on me, their headlights glaring in my mirrors like the eyes of some predatory beast. I reached for my CB radio, my voice trembling as I called out, "Breaker, breaker, this is Roadrunner. Anybody out there?" Static crackled through the radio, but there was no response. Panic began to claw at the edges of my mind as I realized that I was on my own, isolated on this desolate stretch of highway. I glanced at my GPS, hoping to find the nearest town or gas station where I could seek refuge, but the screen displayed only a single word in bold letters, "No service." My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the gang of SUVs grow closer, their headlights now blinding in their intensity. It was clear that they were not interested in passing me, they were closing in with a malevolent purpose. As the convoy drew dangerously near, I noticed something even more unsettling, masked figures in the windows of the SUVs. Their faces were obscured by dark hoods, and their intent was clear. They were not here for a friendly chat. I knew I had to make a decision, and I had to make it fast. The road ahead was winding and treacherous, with steep cliffs on one side and sheer drops on the other. I couldn't outrun them on this terrain, but I could outmaneuver them. I swerved into the opposing lane, praying that no oncoming traffic would appear. The gang reacted swiftly, their vehicles following suit as they attempted to box me in. I could hear the roar of their engines, the relentless pursuit of predators closing in on their prey. I had to push my truck to its limits, weaving around tight corners and accelerating down straightaways, all while glancing over my shoulder to keep tabs on their movements. My heart raced, and sweat poured down my brow as I navigated the treacherous terrain. My truck groaned in protest, but I pushed it harder, determined to escape this nightmarish chase. The gang was relentless, their vehicles pursuing me with a ferocity that sent chills down my spine. They seemed to anticipate my every move, blocking off escape routes and cutting off potential avenues of retreat. But I was not ready to give up. I had faced my fair share of challenges on the road, but this was different. This was a life or death situation, and I would do whatever it took to survive. I spotted a narrow dirt road branching off from the highway, a path that led into the heart of the desert. It was a risky move, but I had no other options. I veered onto the dirt road, praying that it would lead me to safety. The gang followed, their vehicles kicking up dust and gravel as they pursued me down the winding path. The darkness of the desert swallowed us whole, and I felt like a lone ship adrift on an ocean of shadows. I couldn't see where the road led, but I had no choice but to keep going. The adrenaline surged through my veins, and every nerve in my body screamed with fear and determination. The chase seemed to stretch on for an eternity, the gang's vehicles never more than a few feet from my bumper. I could hear their shouts and curses through the open window, their voices distorted by anger and frustration. I knew that I couldn't keep this up much longer. My truck was taking a beating, and the desert road showed no mercy. But I couldn't afford to stop, not with these relentless pursuers on my tail. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light on the horizon. It was the glow of a small town, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I pushed my truck harder, racing toward the distant lights with every ounce of strength I had left. The gang continued to pursue me, their vehicles close behind, but I refused to give in. As I approached the town, I could see the familiar signs of civilization, a gas station, a diner, and a few scattered houses. I honked my horn and flashed my headlights, praying that someone would come to my aid. The gang's vehicles drew closer, and I knew that I was running out of time. But then, to my immense relief, I saw the flashing lights of a police car up ahead. I swerved into the gas station, coming to a screeching halt as the gang's vehicles skidded to a stop behind me. The police car pulled in front of me, blocking the gang's escape route. The officers emerged from their car, guns drawn, and ordered the gang to surrender. The masked figures were apprehended, their faces unmasked to reveal expressions of anger and defeat. As I stepped out of my truck, my legs trembling with exhaustion, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and gratitude. The nightmare was over, and I had escaped with my life intact. The police questioned me about the incident, and I told them everything: the mysterious gang, the relentless pursuit, and the harrowing chase through the desert. They nodded grimly, as if my story confirmed their worst suspicions. I later learned that the gang was involved in smuggling operations along the border, and they had mistaken me for a potential threat. They had pursued me with the intent of silencing me before I could report their activities to the authorities. As I continued my journey to Nogales, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The darkness of that night, the relentless pursuit through the desert, would forever haunt my nightmares. So, I share this story now, not as a warning or a plea for help, but as a testament to the dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The highways of this country hold secrets, tales of darkness and despair that stretch beyond the asphalt and into the very soul of the land. And I, for one, will never forget the night I found myself racing along the winding roads near the Mexican border, pursued by something far more sinister than any ghost. Let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I've driven countless miles across this vast land of ours, from the bustling streets of New York City to the desolate stretches of highway in the heart of Texas. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling experience that unfolded one sweltering summer night near the Mexican border on a stretch of road they call the Devil's Highway. It was a blistering July evening, and I was making the long haul from Phoenix, Arizona, to El Paso, Texas. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the oppressive heat of the day had given way to a stifling, dry warmth that seemed to seep into my very bones. I had been on the road for hours, the monotonous hum of my truck's engine lulling me into a state of near hypnosis. The miles stretched out endlessly before me, the desert landscape devoid of any signs of life. It was the kind of desolation that can play tricks on your mind, making you question your sanity. As I drove deeper into the heart of the desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see another vehicle tailing me, but there was nothing there except the empty road stretching out behind. I told myself it was just the loneliness of the desert getting to me, but the unease settled in the pit of my stomach, a nagging sensation that refused to be ignored. I had heard stories from other truckers about the dangers of driving near the Mexican border, tales of drug cartels and smugglers who would stop at nothing to protect their illicit trade. It was a risk I had always been aware of, but the need to make a living had kept me on the road, despite the dangers. As I continued to drive, the darkness outside grew more oppressive, and the air seemed to thicken with each passing mile. The road ahead stretched out into the void, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the night. That's when I saw it, a lone figure standing at the side of the road, a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere. It was a sight so out of place that it sent a shiver down my spine. I slowed down and pulled over, my better judgment telling me to keep driving, but something compelled me to stop. The figure approached my truck, its features obscured by the darkness. I rolled down my window and asked, "Need a lift?" The figure didn't respond immediately, its silence stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, it said, "El Paso." I nodded and motioned for the hitchhiker to climb in. It was a decision I would come to regret. The hitchhiker settled into the cab of my truck, and as I pulled back onto the road, I couldn't help but steal a glance at them. It was then that I saw something that sent my heart racing, a glint of metal protruding from their backpack. I knew I should have never stopped, that I had made a grave mistake. But it was too late now. I was alone in the desert with a stranger, a hitchhiker who was anything but ordinary. As we drove in silence, the unease in the cab of my truck grew palpable. I could feel the weight of the hitchhiker's gaze on me, their eyes burning into my soul. It was as if they knew something I could never comprehend. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness outside broken only by the occasional flicker of distant stars. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was headed for something dark and sinister, something that would change the course of my life forever. And then, as if on cue, the hitchhiker spoke, their voice low and filled with an eerie calm. "Do you believe in the devil, driver?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "What?" "The devil," they repeated. "Do you believe in the devil?" I glanced at the hitchhiker, their face still shrouded in darkness. "I don't know what you're talking about." They let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "You will." The hitchhiker's words hung in the air like a dark omen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As we continued to drive, the hitchhiker began to speak in riddles, their words weaving a tale of darkness and despair. They spoke of a cursed stretch of highway, the Devil's Highway, where the boundaries between our world and the world beyond grew thin. They spoke of a pact, a deal made in the darkest corners of the desert, a deal that had bound their fate to that cursed road for all eternity. And now, they were searching for something that could break that curse and set them free. I listened in horror as the hitchhiker's words grew more cryptic and disturbing. They spoke of rituals and sacrifices, of ancient legends and unspeakable horrors that lurked in the shadows. As the miles passed, I couldn't help but glance at the hitchhiker's backpack, the glint of metal still visible. I knew that whatever they were searching for, it was something dark and dangerous, something that I wanted no part of. I knew I had to get away from the hitchhiker, to put as much distance between us as possible. But the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the darkness of the desert pressed in on all sides. I finally spotted a rest area up ahead, a lone oasis in the midst of the desert. I pulled over and turned to the hitchhiker, my voice trembling. "This is as far as I can take you," I said. "You need to get out." The hitchhiker nodded and climbed out of the truck, their backpack slung over their shoulder. As they disappeared into the darkness, they turned to me and said, "Remember what I told you, driver. The Devil's Highway is a road to hell, and once you're on it, there's no turning back." I watched in horror as the hitchhiker vanished into the night, their words echoing in my mind. I knew then that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, that I had stumbled upon something that should never have been discovered. As I continued my journey to El Paso, the memory of that night haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had come face to face with something truly evil, something that defied all reason and explanation. So, I share this story now, not as a warning or a plea for help, but as a testament to the horrors that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The Devil's Highway is a road to hell, a road that I will never travel again, a road that I hope no one else ever has to. Have you ever been on a highway so isolated, so desolate, that it feels like you're driving through the very bowels of the earth? I have, and let me tell you, it's an experience that will make the hairs on your neck stand up. This is the story of the night my truck broke down on a forsaken stretch of highway near the Mexican border, a night that forever changed the way I see the world. I was driving a long-haul route from Phoenix, Arizona, to El Paso, Texas, a route I'd traversed countless times before. But this particular night was different. The sun had long sunk below the horizon, and the stars above shimmered in the inky blackness of the desert sky. As a trucker, I'd seen my fair share of isolated highways and remote stretches of road. But nothing could have prepared me for the desolation of this place. The vast expanse of the Sonoran Desert stretched out on all sides, a barren landscape that seemed to go on forever. My rig, an old but reliable Peterbilt, roared down the asphalt, the steady hum of the engine lulling me into a trance-like state. The highway was empty, not a single vehicle in sight for miles. I felt like the last person on Earth, a lone traveler in a forgotten corner of the world. The night air was hot and dry, a suffocating heat that pressed in from all sides. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read a scorching 95 degrees Fahrenheit, even though it was well past midnight. The desert was a merciless mistress, and I was her captive audience. As I continued to drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if the very air around me was charged with an unnatural tension, a palpable sense of unease that sent shivers down my spine. The road stretched out before me, straight and unending, disappearing into the horizon. But then, just as I was beginning to relax, I heard a loud clunk from beneath my truck. The engine sputtered, and the dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. I cursed under my breath as I wrestled with the steering wheel, trying to keep control of the now faltering rig. The truck began to slow, its engine wheezing like an old man with a bad cough. I knew I had to get off the road before the truck ground to a halt. I managed to steer it onto the shoulder, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust as I came to a stop. I turned off the engine and climbed out of the cab, the desert silence enveloping me like a heavy blanket. The night was still, almost eerily so, as if the entire world were holding its breath. I popped the hood and pulled out my flashlight, casting a beam of light on the engine. I had a vague idea of what I was looking for, but I wasn't exactly a mechanic. I was just a trucker with a problem that had stranded me in the middle of nowhere. I checked the oil, the coolant, and the belts, but everything seemed fine. There was no smoke, no strange noises, nothing to indicate what had caused the breakdown. It was as if the truck had simply decided to stop working. I sighed in frustration and pulled out my cell phone, hoping for a miracle. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart sank. No signal. Not even a single bar. I felt a sense of panic welling up inside me. I was in the middle of the desert, with no way to call for help and no idea how far I was from the nearest town. I was well and truly stranded. I knew I had to stay with the truck. Desert nights could be unforgiving, with temperatures plummeting to dangerous lows. I couldn't risk wandering off and getting lost in the darkness. So, I settled into the cab of the truck, hoping that help would come soon. I turned off the engine to conserve what little fuel I had left and tried to make myself as comfortable as possible. As the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, like the prickling of the hairs on the back of my neck. I glanced out the window, but there was nothing to see except the endless desert stretching out in all directions. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the unease remained. I checked my watch. It was nearly 2 a.m., and there was still no sign of help. The desert seemed to stretch on endlessly, a vast and unforgiving landscape that showed no mercy. I reached for the CB radio and tried to call for assistance, but all I got was static. I knew it was a long shot, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of desperation. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help and no way to know if anyone even knew I was out here. I settled back into the cab and tried to distract myself with a book, but my mind kept wandering back to the unease I felt. It was as if the very air around me had taken on a sinister quality, a malevolent presence that refused to be ignored. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it, a faint, distant sound that sent a chill down my spine. It was the unmistakable rumble of engines, the sound of approaching vehicles. I climbed out of the truck and peered down the highway, my heart racing. In the distance, I could see the faint glimmer of headlights, a pair of them growing steadily brighter as they approached. Relief washed over me. Maybe it was a good Samaritan, someone who had spotted my stranded truck and had come to help. But as the headlights drew closer, I realized that this was no ordinary encounter. It was a convoy of vehicles, a line of darkened SUVs that seemed to materialize out of the darkness. My heart sank as I watched the vehicles draw nearer. I had heard stories from other truckers about the dangers of driving near the Mexican border, tales of drug cartels and smugglers who would stop at nothing to protect their illicit trade. I knew I was in trouble. The convoy of SUVs was closing in fast, and there was no way I could outrun them in my disabled truck. I climbed back into the cab, my mind racing as I tried to come up with a plan. I knew I had to stay with the truck, but I also knew that I couldn't just sit here and wait for the convoy to arrive. I reached for my flashlight and popped the hood of the truck, hoping to make it look like I was doing some repairs. It was a feeble attempt at deception, but it was all I had. The convoy drew closer, and I could see the masked figures in the windows of the SUVs, their faces shrouded in darkness. I knew they were trouble, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The lead SUV pulled up behind my truck, and the engine rumbled to a stop. I could hear the doors of the vehicle opening and closing, the sound of footsteps approaching. I gripped the flashlight in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but I knew I had to be prepared to defend myself. The footsteps grew closer, and then, suddenly, they stopped. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, my heart in my throat. And then, to my immense relief, I heard a voice that spoke in Spanish, but with a hint of English. "Necesitas ayuda?" the voice asked. "Do you need help?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I replied in my broken Spanish. "Mi camión está roto." My truck is broken. The masked figure approached, and I could see the outline of a man in the darkness. He was holding a flashlight of his own, and he shone it on the engine of my truck. He examined the engine for a moment, then turned back to me. "El motor está muerto." The engine is dead. I nodded, relieved that he seemed to be offering genuine help. See. Yes, it is. The man spoke into a radio, and a few moments later, more masked figures emerged from the other SUVs. They began to set up flares and cones, creating a barrier around my truck to warn other drivers of the roadblock. I watched as they worked, my initial fear giving way to a sense of gratitude. These people had come to my aid, and I couldn't have been more relieved. As they continued to work, I tried to strike up a conversation with the man who had first approached me. His name was Carlos, and he explained that they were part of a group of volunteers who patrolled the highways near the border, helping stranded travelers and reporting any suspicious activity to the authorities. I couldn't believe my luck. It seemed that I had stumbled upon a group of good Samaritans, a beacon of hope in the midst of the desert darkness. As the hours passed, I got to know Carlos and the rest of the volunteers better. They told me stories of the challenges they faced, the dangers of patrolling these isolated highways, and the satisfaction they derived from helping those in need. I felt a sense of camaraderie with them, a shared bond born of our mutual isolation in the desert night. We talked about our families, our homes, and our dreams for the future. It was a strange but comforting intimacy, forged in the crucible of the desert. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a tow truck arrived to take my disabled rig to the nearest repair shop. I said my goodbyes to Carlos and the other volunteers, my heart heavy with gratitude. As I watched my truck being loaded onto the tow truck, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of relief. I had been stranded in the middle of the desert, vulnerable and alone. But thanks to the kindness of strangers, I had made it through the night unscathed. As the tow truck pulled away, I glanced back at the convoy of SUVs, disappearing into the darkness. I knew that these people were out there, patrolling the highways, watching over travelers like me. I continued on my journey to El Paso, a renewed sense of purpose driving me forward. The desert had shown me its harsh and unforgiving side, but it had also revealed a glimmer of humanity in the midst of the darkness. So, the next time you find yourself on a desolate highway, with nothing but the vast expanse of the desert stretching out before you, remember that you're never truly alone. There are people out there, like Carlos and his fellow volunteers, who are willing to lend a helping hand in your time of need. And if you ever hear the rumble of engines in the distance, don't be too quick to judge. Sometimes, in the darkest of places, you might just find a glimmer of light, a beacon of hope in the most unexpected of forms.